The Kenyan capital was back in motion after days of protest against the Finance Bill 2024, which President William Ruto has since refused to sign. Traffic throughout Nairobi resumed its usual flow.
I've moved home. Mombasa Road was good because I stay in Kitengela, so it was cool. Today I can't complain.
For days, these streets in the Kenyan capital were a battleground between security officers and protesters. But today, there is relative calm. Shops have been opened and people are back to business. Traders had deserted the city's CBD earlier in the week. Ishmael Mursal runs an electronic appliances shop and is counting his losses after looters took advantage of the protests to break into his shop.
And we were just here when they were looting and helpless.
What will it take for you to be back on your feet?
It will take some time, to take a lot of time, but we'll pick up the pieces. And I believe this is what God has given us. And from there, and I believe in that, and God will give me again.
In the capital and many other cities and towns in Kenya, the government has deployed security forces around strategic areas. Well, this is one of the roads that leads to State House, the home of the Kenyan president. It has been cordoned off. The security officers here have one mandate: to ensure that very few people go beyond here. Access to many roads leading to the Supreme Court and Parliament buildings has also been limited. The demonstrators, led by Gen Z, has announced several days of mourning for their comrades killed during the protests. They have vowed to continue to mobilize, culminating again in nationwide protests next week. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN, Nairobi.
Well, the protests quieted down on Friday, but Kenya is still in an economic crisis due to its debt and global tough times. Well, let's bring in Nerima Wako Ojiwa, a youth educator on electoral processes, constitution, government institutions and functions. She's also the director of Siasa Place, a political engagement group here in Kenya. She's joining me now via Zoom. Thank you for joining us, Nerima, on the program. The increased taxes were meant to help generate more revenue and pay for debt. How does the president now hope to balance it out?
Well, thanks for having me. Right now, what we are aware of is that government is going to fall short in terms of their target. Initially, with the Finance Bill 2024, it was at $2.7 billion. Now they're only going to manage to collect about $1.6 billion. So it means they're going to have to rethink, re-strategize, look at austerity measures, how they're going to be able to cut costs to be able to meet specific targets that they had put in place for the year.
So let's look at those austerity measures, Nerima. The continuing protests have forced the president now to shift his focus to what you're calling cost-cutting measures. This is a political and economic hot potato. So how is he going to do that?
I mean, it's not going to be easy to do, because what a lot of Kenyans are seeing and a lot of people are really complaining about, especially online, is the opulence of government. They are talking about the amount of traveling that our president has done. And not only has he traveled quite a bit, he normally travels with quite a large entourage. That also means costs. So people are questioning hospitality, questioning local travel, international travel. It also means the luxurious cars. People have also been pointing out to some of the items that we've been seeing members of government officials wearing, very expensive watches and belts. People are concerned because the population is being told, you need to tighten up your belts, while we're seeing government actually spending much, much more. So people are questioning particular offices that are not constitutional. We're talking about the office of the Prime Minister or the cabinet secretaries having, spouses. And particular, we have a office the First Lady has of intercessors, 100 people who are paid to pray for the country. So people are wondering, are these some of the costs that we should be concerned about, considering that Kenya is at 68% GDP? while according to World Bank, IMF, they recommend countries not to pass 55%. So our public debt is way over. So hopefully we get to see some answers. He already shared that he was going to reduce on some of the costs when it comes to transport, but people want to see much more action.
So let's look at the part of the protesters and the Kenyan public. Do they understand the president's reasoning behind the need for more taxes? For example, the need to generate more revenue and the pressure to repay the foreign debt.
People understand that the economy is a global issue. We're seeing the high cost of living globally, and the fact that Kenya has a very young population. The average age is 19. That's something that's similar across the continent. However, what people are frustrated about is not seeing their tax really feeding into public service. They're concerned that when it comes to access to healthcare, for instance, health is going up. We've seen salaries being slashed, but access to drugs in hospitals is still something that's difficult, and a lot of people are questioning. So I'm paying a lot of taxes, but I'm not receiving enough services from the government. That's where the disconnect is. We really do need to get an understanding of how much we actually owe. People are requesting for full disclosure of our public debt and how is it contributing annually in terms of our efforts. People are more concerned in terms of public finance management and the reduction of corruption, which is now coming in inflated budgets.
So there is also quite a bit of backlash against the IMF and the World Bank. Any practical alternatives to the Bretton Woods institutions for Africa?
Yes, I believe that people are questioning when it comes to debt, especially in third world or the global south, because they are, particular institutions, organizations that are wondering whether debt can be forgiven. And what does that mean? People are questioning foreign relationships with foreign countries as well. What are some of these agreements? A lot of bilateral agreements, trade agreements, for instance, it's not open to the public until the agreement is signed. And then you find out years later what your country actually agreed to. And a lot of times it's the young population that's going to have to pay this debt while they haven't been involved in the particular process in the first place. I think that the evolution of technology has expedited access to information, and our constitution does have Article 35, which is access to information. So we're living and breathing our constitution when we talk about young people's engagement. They're asking questions on why certain things are not accessible, information is not accessible, and them as a citizen who's supposed to be able to engage effectively in the decisions that government is making, because they have given that power to representatives. But why are they not getting that same information back toward them? So the question around debt is something that's definitely going to be asked, not just in Kenya, but I believe on the continent, especially as our populations continue to grow and we're seeing opportunities becoming limited. We're going to have to ask tough questions. Our country is going to be able to pay this debt. What does that look like? And especially when you're talking about young people, by the time they're 25, not a lot of them have access to employment and opportunity. So what does that mean when we're talking about currencies, especially currencies that we are paying this debt from foreign countries?